Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Tonight, we're walking straight into the shadows of Halloween night with 8 true horror stories. Encounters that prove sometimes the monsters on this night aren't wearing masks. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, let's step into the darkness together. Story number 1. I pressed the coin into the palm of the toll booth attendant without thinking much about it. Just another small stop on a long drive I'd been making for hours. The booth was the only one on that stretch, a squat little structure with a glass window, a small drawer for money, and a handwritten sign taped above it that said, "Exact change only." The man inside didn't speak. He just nodded once, slid the drawer out, and I dropped the coin in. I remember glancing at the faint reflection of my face in the glass, tired eyes, unbrushed hair, then shifting the car into gear and rolling forward. Not even 20 seconds later, curiosity tugged at me. Something about the man's silence felt off, like I'd stepped into the wrong kind of interaction, one that didn't match the rhythm of the road. I checked my rearview mirror, expecting to see the booth shrinking behind me, maybe the faint orange glow of its small lamp. But there was nothing. Just an empty strip of road and the hills beyond. I blinked hard. For a second I thought maybe I'd zoned out, missed a turn, or misremembered. But no, I knew what I'd just done. My coin was gone. My fingers still tingled with the faint sweat from holding it. That man had taken it. So where the hell was the booth? My first reaction wasn't fear. It was irritation, mixed with disbelief. I actually pulled the car over onto the shoulder, turned off the radio, and leaned over the steering wheel, staring back. I felt my heart start to beat faster as I tried to make sense of it. A booth doesn't just vanish. Maybe it had been some kind of temporary checkpoint. Maybe they'd pulled it off the road. That made no sense either. There was no truck. No workers, no traces of anything. I sat there a minute, chewing the inside of my cheek, debating whether to turn around. Something in me resisted the idea, though. I didn't want to drive back past that spot. It wasn't logical, but it was instinct, like touching a stove and knowing the heat would only burn worse the second time. I forced myself to keep driving. The road stretched out thin and empty. No other cars, no lights, no buildings. Just me and the sound of my tires humming on the asphalt. I tried distracting myself by fiddling with the radio, but every station hissed with static. A flicker of unease slid down my spine. I muttered out loud, "Christ, Sammy, it's just a booth," like saying it could pin the world back in place. Another half hour passed, and the gas light blinked on. That's when the nerves tightened again, because I realized I hadn't seen a single station since the booth. I was running low, and Christchurch was still at least another hour away. The road here wasn't the kind where you trusted the needle. It could dip to empty quicker than expected. I told myself I'd stop at the first sign of fuel, even a small one. When the green glow of a roadside service area appeared, relief washed over me. I pulled in fast, eager to fill up, stretch my legs, and shake off that strange anxiety. But when I got out of the car, the air was too still. The station looked brand new, spotless, every surface gleaming like it had been built yesterday. But it was empty. Not closed, just abandoned. Lights on, pumps working, but no one inside. I tried the door to the shop. Locked. Through the glass I could see shelves stocked with snacks and drinks, perfectly arranged as though waiting for someone to buy them. I walked back to the pump, swiped my card. It beeped red. I tried again. Same thing. I pulled out cash. The slot spat the note back at me. "Come on," I whispered, slamming my palm against the pump. That was when I noticed the small sticker slapped crookedly on the side. It wasn't official branding, just a black and white square. Handwritten across it were the words, Exact change only. My stomach dropped. I looked around the empty lot, my ears filling with the sound of my own breathing. My mind raced. This wasn't coincidence. It connected to the booth somehow. My coin, the man, the sign. I tried convincing myself maybe a prankster had been at work, but that excuse rang hollow. I climbed back in the car, slammed the locks down, and gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. My hands shook as I turned the key, half expecting the engine not to start. It roared to life, but the relief didn't stick. Every instinct screamed at me to get back on the highway and not stop again. The road swallowed me back up, blacker and lonelier than before. My fuel gauge hovered too close to empty, the needle twitching with every bump. I kept glancing into the mirror, and each time I did, I braced myself. I thought I'd see the booth again, waiting, closer than it should be. But what I did see was worse. Headlights in the distance. At first, I was grateful. Another car meant I wasn't alone anymore. I slowed down slightly, letting it approach, hoping to follow it toward a town. But the lights didn't behave right. They grew closer too quickly, then stalled at a fixed distance. Not overtaking, not falling back, just hovering. I told myself to calm down, that plenty of drivers keep distance at night. Still, every time I glanced back, those headlights seemed wrong. Too symmetrical. Too bright, but not illuminating the road between us. Like they weren't real beams at all, just imitation. I pressed the accelerator, testing it. The car behind me matched instantly. My chest tightened. My foot pressed harder, my own car straining, the road a blur beneath me. No matter what I did, the lights stuck exactly where they were. I finally screamed, raw and loud, the kind of sound you don't plan. My hands trembled on the wheel. I shouted, "What do you want?" Though of course there was no answer. When the road dipped into a curve, I made a snap decision. I pulled hard onto a gravel turnout, my tires skidding, heart hammering so loud I thought it might split me open. I spun, around, headlights slicing the dark as I faced back toward the road. The car that had been tailing me should have blasted past, its beams spilling across my windshield. But there was nothing. Just silence. Just the empty stretch of highway. I was gasping, dizzy with fear, clutching the steering wheel like a lifeline. My coin purse was still in the console. I opened it without thinking. The coin I'd given that booth was gone, but now another coin sat inside. Same size, same weight, but old, tarnished, its markings unreadable. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My pulse drummed in my ears. I knew with an unshakable certainty that if I paid with that coin again, the road wouldn't let me leave. That's when the fuel needle hit bottom. The car coughed. My stomach twisted in panic as I coasted along, searching desperately for any sign of life. My lights finally landed on a building up ahead, another service stop. I should have felt hope, but dread sank heavier instead. Still, I had no choice. The car wheezed to a halt as I pulled into the lot. Unlike the last one, this station wasn't spotless. It was weathered, stained with years of use. Lights flickered weakly overhead. Inside, a young woman sat behind the counter, scrolling on her phone. Normal. Real. I forced myself out of the car, legs unsteady, and filled the tank. My card worked this time. The pump clicked, ordinary and solid. Relief flooded me so fast it made me want to cry. When I went inside to grab a drink, the woman finally looked up at me. She smiled faintly, polite but tired. Her voice was soft when she asked, "Long night?" I nodded, too shaken to explain. She rang up my drink, and I pulled out my wallet. That's when I saw it again. The old coin, sitting in the slot where my credit card should have been. I swear on my life I hadn't put it there. My throat tightened. I dropped a note on the counter, grabbed my bottle and walked out without waiting for change. I didn't want to see her expression if she noticed the coin. The rest of the drive into Christchurch passed in a blur. No strange booths, no headlights following me, no abandoned stations, just the normal city waiting at the end. But I didn't feel safe. I still don't, because the coin never left. It's in my drawer now, tucked under papers, but I check it sometimes. The tarnish shifts, like the markings try to rearrange when I'm not looking. And every time I drive at night, I catch myself glancing too often into the rearview mirror, waiting for a booth that should never have been there to appear again. I don't tell many people this story, because it sounds insane. But you asked me why I don't like driving alone at night anymore, why I flinch every time I see a toll booth. And that's why. Because I know, with a certainty that makes my skin crawl even now, that I already paid once. And if I ever pay again, I won't come back. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. Story number 2. I was fiddling with the radio dial while my cousin Arav kept his eyes fixed on the empty stretch of road ahead. It was past midnight, and we were somewhere between Pune and Satara, driving back from a friend's wedding. The highway had thinned out, barely any trucks or bikes crossing us, and the silence inside the car was starting to feel too heavy. I just wanted some music, anything to fill the quiet. My fingers brushed past static, faint Bollywood songs, and then a crisp, calm voice broke through, speaking in Marathi at first, then English, with perfect clarity. What jolted me wasn't the accent, but the words. 2 cousins, in a white Santro, driving south at 70 kilometers an hour searching for sound. I froze, hand still on the knob. "Arav," I said, not taking my eyes off the stereo. "Listen to this." The voice continued smoothly, no hesitation, no static. The driver's cousin is wearing a blue shirt. The passenger is adjusting the dial nervously. They don't know they are being heard. Arav glanced at me sharply. He was in a blue shirt. I felt my throat tighten. "Turn it off," Arav muttered, but my fingers felt numb. I didn't move. My ears strained as the voice carried on, describing things inside our car that no one outside could see. The back seat has 2 plastic bags, one red and one white, from the wedding hall. The passenger's shoes are off. He is curling his toes. I jerked my feet back instinctively, as if I'd been caught doing something shameful. Arav swore under his breath, reached over, and snapped the radio off. The car went silent, except for the engine hum and the tires whispering over asphalt. My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't know what to say. After a few seconds, Arav muttered, "It's some prank. Maybe trucker channels. Ignore it." But his voice didn't sound convinced. He rolled his shoulders, gripped the steering wheel tighter, and I could tell he wanted me to stay quiet. We drove for a few kilometers like that, but I couldn't resist. I turned the dial on again. The channel picked up instantly, no static, as if it was waiting for me. They are testing it again. They think turning it off makes it disappear, but the car keeps moving and the voice keeps following. I snapped upright, my stomach hollow. "How the hell?" I started, but Arav slammed the radio button off and shouted, "Stop touching it! Just leave it, okay?" His voice cracked, betraying his fear. We didn't argue. We just sat in silence, each pretending not to think about what we'd just heard. 10 minutes later, it came back on its own. No one touched the dial, but the radio lit up, and the same calm voice slid into the car like a third passenger. The driver's hand is trembling. The passenger is watching him, wondering if he should take the wheel. They don't trust each other. Arav yanked his hands off the steering wheel for a second and shouted, "See? It's lying!" His knuckles were pale, his face drenched in sweat. But I had been watching him. His hand had been trembling. "Pull over," I whispered. "We should stop." Arav shook his head violently. No chance. Not on this empty stretch. I'm not stopping. The voice cut in smoothly, almost amused. He's right. Don't stop. If you stop, it finds you faster. That broke me. My voice came out high, tight. Who the hell are you? I shouted into the empty dashboard. What do you want? For the first time, the voice paused. Static crackled faintly, and then it said, We only describe. We never want. We drove faster, pushing the little car up to 90. Arav didn't speak, his jaw locked. I sat stiff, heart hammering, watching the empty black fields on either side of the highway blur past. And still, the voice kept narrating. It mentioned Arav's breathing quickening. It mentioned the blister forming on my heel. It mentioned the way we avoided looking at each other now. Each detail was too exact, too intimate, as if something invisible was sitting between us, watching closer than either of us could. At some point, I lost track of time. The road stretched endlessly. Every time I thought about turning the radio off, I remembered how it came back on by itself. Arav muttered a prayer under his breath. I clutched the seatbelt, as though it was the only anchor keeping me from floating into madness. Then the voice said something different. It spoke our names, not just the driver or the passenger. It said, Arav will not take this road again. Ishan will try to forget. They are almost at the turn where the accident happened. Arav slammed the brakes. The car screeched, fishtailed, and finally stopped at an angle on the road's shoulder. We sat gasping, staring at each other, both white-faced. What accident? Arav rasped. What is it talking about? Before I could answer, headlights flared in the rear view. A truck thundered past us at breakneck speed, inches from smashing into our side. If we hadn't stopped, it would have plowed into us head-on around the bend. My stomach dropped. My skin prickled cold. That voice hadn't been warning us. It had been describing what almost happened. Arav sat frozen, gripping the wheel, lips trembling. I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, not from sadness but from raw terror. The voice didn't speak for a long minute, leaving us in a silence that felt heavier than its presence. Then it returned, softer now. They will live tonight. Others didn't. We couldn't take it anymore. Arav restarted the car, and we sped until we hit the next dhaba with lights and people. We pulled in, parked crookedly, and just sat there, breathing like survivors dragged out of water. The radio was silent now, completely dead. Not even static when I turned the dial. Inside the dhaba, over watery tea, we tried to rationalize. Maybe it was some emergency frequency, some coincidence. But the details, it knew too much. Arav shook his head, eyes darting like he expected someone to walk in and finish the narration. We barely spoke to each other on the rest of the trip home. For weeks after, every time I drove at night, I kept glancing at the radio, waiting for it to light up. It didn't. Arav refused to drive long distances again. He sold that Santro a month later. I asked him once if he told the new owner anything. He snapped at me, said, "Don't ever mention it again." But the worst part came later, when I was alone, scrolling news archives late at night because I couldn't stop thinking about that one sentence. Others didn't. I found an article from 2003 about a bus that crashed on the same bend where the truck nearly hit us. The report listed dozens dead. I don't know why, but I read every name. My chest tightened when I saw the last one. Arav. My cousin's name. I never showed him that article. Maybe it was another Arav, maybe just coincidence. But I can't shake the memory of that calm voice, speaking with such certainty, as if it wasn't predicting or warning, but simply reading from a page already written. Sometimes I dream about that night, and in the dream, the radio comes on again. But this time, it doesn't describe what I'm doing. It describes what I'm thinking. and it says, "He knows he didn't survive that road either. He's just telling the story, the way we told it first." Story number 3. I was folding the new paper map we had just bought at a small gas station outside Ulu when something caught my eye. Tucked in the glove compartment was another map, one we hadn't bought, one that looked older, creased and stained with oil marks. I pulled it out, curious, thinking maybe the rental car company had left it there. But in the middle of the map, across a narrow country road drawn in faded ink, someone had scrawled in thick black marker, "Do not drive here after dark." At first, I laughed. It looked like the kind of warning a bored teenager would scribble on a tourist map, some attempt at a prank. My wife frowned and asked why I was chuckling. I showed her, expecting her to roll her eyes, but instead she just pressed her lips together and glanced back at the kids, who were half asleep in the back seat. "Let's not show them," she said quietly. "No need to freak them out." She was right. The strangeness of it clung to me, though. We'd been in Finland for 3 days on a family vacation, and everything so far had been calm, almost too calm. The endless trees, the quiet stretches of road, the silence broken only by the occasional passing truck. The GPS was already programmed with our next stop, a lakeside cabin we had rented, about 2 hours away. When I checked the route, my stomach knotted. The highlighted path matched the exact road marked on that old map. I tried to brush it off. It was the shortest route, and daylight was already fading. Taking a longer detour would mean dragging the kids through another hour of back seat whining. "We'll be fine," I told myself. "It's just a stupid scribble." The road narrowed quickly once we turned onto it. No streetlights, no other cars, just dense forest pressing in from both sides. My wife shifted uncomfortably in her seat and said, "This doesn't feel right. Can't we just go around?" I tightened my grip on the wheel and told her it was just a shortcut, nothing more. But the further we drove, the heavier the silence became. About 20 minutes in, the GPS began to glitch. The glowing line blinked, vanished, then returned, jumping around like it couldn't decide where we were. My son stirred and asked, half asleep, "Are we there yet?" His little voice jolted me because it was the only sound besides the hum of the engine. "Soon, buddy," I lied. My daughter whispered, "It's too quiet here." I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but I felt it too. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, like something was listening. Then the gas gauge dropped, suddenly. 1 minute we were at half a tank. The next it plunged near empty. My wife leaned forward, staring at it. "That can't be right." The needle trembled, then steadied on the red line. Panic started to creep in, though I forced a smile and said, "Probably just a sensor glitch." But I could hear my own voice, shaking. Not long after, we passed the first sign of civilization, an old wooden signpost, weathered and crooked, with faded Finnish writing that I couldn't make out. The kids pressed their faces to the window, asking what it said. I slowed the car, but the words were too worn to read. Then my daughter said something that made my chest tighten. "There's another one." She pointed to the trees. Painted on the bark, barely visible in the dim light, was a word in thick black paint. "LA." My wife whispered, "That means don't." We drove another few meters, and another tree carried the same word. Then another. It was scrawled again and again, each tree a warning, urgent and uneven, as though someone had painted them in haste. I pressed the accelerator, wanting to get through this cursed stretch as fast as possible. My wife said we should turn back, but the road had narrowed so much, thick forest on either side, no place to turn around. My daughter started to cry softly, trying to keep quiet, while my son buried his face in his blanket. The car jolted suddenly. The tires rolled over something. I slammed the brakes, and the seatbelts pulled us forward. The kids yelped. I jumped out with a flashlight, my heart pounding, expecting to see an animal. Instead, there were stones, large, carefully placed stones, lined across the road like someone had built a barrier. I kicked one and it rolled aside, too deliberately arranged to be natural. My wife leaned out the window and hissed, "Get back in the car, please." I shoved enough rocks aside to make space and drove on, pulse racing. My wife's hands were clenched so tight in her lap, her knuckles had turned white. I told her we were fine, but I didn't believe it myself. Then, ahead in the distance, we saw lights. A building. Relief washed over me. Maybe a farmhouse, maybe somewhere we could ask for directions or gas. The closer we got, the less sense it made. The building was low and squat, with boarded windows, the wood gray and splintered. The lights weren't electric. They were oil lamps set along the porch, flickering faintly. I slowed, unsure, and the kids perked up, whispering that maybe we could stop. But my wife shook her head violently. "Don't," she muttered. "Keep driving." That's when I noticed the cars. Old, rusted cars lined the dirt yard, some with shattered windshields, some half buried in weeds. None of them had plates. All of them looked abandoned. Yet the lamps burned steadily, as though someone was still there. I didn't stop. I drove past, eyes fixed on the road, praying no one would step out. My wife glanced back through the rear window and whispered. The lamps went out. Not even 10 minutes later, we saw them. People. At first, just one, standing on the shoulder of the road, watching us. Then another. Then a cluster. Their faces were pale, barely visible, but their stillness was what froze me. They didn't wave, didn't move, didn't blink. They just stood there, lined along the road, heads turning slowly as our car crawled past. My daughter whimpered and covered her face. My son asked, "Why are they out here?" I couldn't answer. I just kept driving, though my foot was heavy on the gas. My wife whispered, "Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop." The GPS suddenly beeped, its screen flickering. For the first time in miles, it displayed a reroute, a sharp left turn onto a side path. I almost cried with relief. I swerved onto it, tires spitting gravel, desperate to get off that cursed road. The path wound sharply, climbing uphill. Branches scraped against the car, loud and violent, like fingernails on glass. The kids were both crying now, and I shouted over the noise, "It's okay! We're almost out!" I didn't believe it, but I had to say it. Finally, the trees began to thin. The road widened, and there, like a miracle, was the main highway. Wide, smooth, with the faint glow of a service station in the distance. We burst onto it like we had been released from a trap. The GPS steadied, showing our route again. The gas gauge flickered and reset, back to nearly half a tank. No one spoke until we pulled into the service station. The kids were asleep within minutes, exhaustion dragging them down. My wife and I sat in silence, staring at each other, unable to process what had just happened. The next morning, in the clear safety of daylight, I went inside the station to buy coffee. On a whim, I pulled out that old map and showed it to the clerk. He was an older man, gray-haired, with the kind of weathered face that had seen too much. When he read the scrawled words, his expression hardened. He pushed the map back toward me without meeting my eyes. "Don't go there," he muttered in Finnish-accented English. "We already did," I admitted, my throat tight. He looked up at me then, and there was no surprise in his eyes, only pity. "You're lucky," he said. "People don't come back from that road." I didn't ask more. I folded the map, shoved it deep into the trash, and when I walked back to the car, I told my wife we'd take the long way to the cabin, even if it added hours. She just nodded, Neither of us ever spoke of it again to the kids. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night, even on the safest, brightest highway, I catch myself glancing at the tree line, expecting to see pale figures standing there, watching. And every time I look at a map now, my eyes search for scribbles, warnings left by strangers. I can't shake the thought that someone, once, tried to save us from that road, and we ignored it until it was nearly too late. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Story number 4. I was already late leaving the hostel when I noticed the car for the first time. It was a silver sedan, a bit older than mine, sitting 3 cars back as I pulled onto the main road towards the festival grounds. At first I thought nothing of it. Traffic was thick, people were pouring in from every direction, and everyone looked just as restless as me. But when the congestion thinned out on the outskirts of Plovdiv, I realized that the same car had kept the same exact distance from me, every turn, every lane change. I slowed a little, just to test it. The sedan slowed too. I remember gripping the wheel tighter, my palms starting to sweat, but I told myself it was just coincidence. I tried to distract myself, turning up the music and rolling down the window. By the time I hit the next intersection, I was calmer. Then the red light stopped me, and I looked in the mirror. The silver sedan eased in right behind me, just 1 car away. Its headlights filled my rear-view mirror, washing the inside of my car with glare. I squinted, leaned closer, and for a moment I swore I could see the driver's silhouette. It looked familiar. Too familiar. I told myself I was just tired, running on little sleep and too much cheap hostel coffee. But when the light turned green, I caught something that made my stomach twist. The license plate. It was exactly the same as mine. Same letters, same numbers. At first, I thought maybe I misread it. But I slowed down, letting the sedan pull closer, and there it was again. My exact plate number. I whispered out loud, "That's impossible." I tried to laugh it off, but it came out shaky. I pulled my phone out of the cup holder, snapped a quick photo, but the angle and the glare made it useless. Still, I knew what I'd seen. I couldn't stop staring at my mirror. The driver was leaning forward slightly, almost the same way I was, hands at 10 and 2, head tilted just like mine. The road opened up and I pressed the gas harder, thinking I'd lose him. My little hatchback rattled as it pushed beyond what I usually dared, but the sedan held steady, matching my speed exactly. Every move I made, he mirrored. A left turn signal. I watched his blink on too. I switched lanes at the last second, cutting in front of a van. He did the same, squeezing in behind me so smoothly it was like he anticipated it. My chest felt tight, and the more I tried to rationalize, the more impossible it seemed. What were the odds of another car? Same model, same plate, same driver? I rubbed my face hard with one hand, muttering to myself. I thought maybe I was losing it. Maybe I was more sleep-deprived than I realized. But then I came up to another light, long and red. I had no choice but to stop. The sedan rolled up alongside me this time, slowing deliberately until it was level with my window. I forced myself to look. The driver turned his head toward me. And it was me. Not just a look-alike, not some cousin or stranger with similar features. It was my face, my hair, even the same black hoodie I was wearing. He smiled at me, but it wasn't casual. It was stretched thin, sharp at the edges, like he was trying too hard. I remember whispering, "No, no, no," while my hands trembled on the steering wheel. The light turned green, and I floored it, my tires squealing. My double didn't move right away. He sat there a beat too long, still staring, before sliding smoothly into motion again. I thought I'd lost him. I even laughed, this desperate laugh that sounded more like a sob, but when I checked my mirror minutes later, he was back, steady as ever. I took an exit I hadn't planned, cutting towards smaller roads outside the city. My GPS barked at me, recalculating, but I ignored it. The streets narrowed, twisting through old blocks of apartments and industrial yards. I thought I could shake him here, maybe find a police station or at least a crowded spot. But every time I turned, I caught the flicker of his headlights behind me. At one point, I pulled over suddenly, slamming on the brakes so hard that my seatbelt cut into my chest. I jumped out, my heart hammering, ready to scream at him, to demand who he was. But when I stepped into the middle of the road, there was no car, just empty pavement stretching behind me, silent and still. My own engine rattled in idle, my hazard lights clicking in rhythm with my heartbeat. I stood there for a full minute, looking around like a fool. Nothing. No sedan, no headlights, no sound. I finally climbed back into my car, my hands shaking so bad I fumbled the keys. I started to convince myself it was stress, a waking dream. But then I checked my side mirror. The sedan was there again, inches from my bumper, as if it had materialized out of thin air, and my face inside it wasn't smiling anymore. It was mouthing something. 3 words, over and over. Get out now. I nearly crashed, pulling back onto the road, slamming the gas pedal down like I was trying to outrun death itself. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed distance. The roads thinned out, the city lights faded, and soon I was driving down a rural stretch with fields on both sides. That's when I realized my fuel gauge was dangerously low. Panic set in hard. If I stopped, he'd stop too. I imagined him stepping out, walking toward me with my own face, my own clothes, maybe even my own voice. I shook my head violently, trying to push the thought away. My vision blurred with tears I didn't want to admit were there. I kept driving until I spotted a small roadside diner with a gravel lot. A few trucks sat parked out front. I pulled in fast, parked crooked, and ran inside. The diner smelled like grease and coffee, and the few people inside turned to look at me. I didn't care. I grabbed the counter, breathless, and told the waitress, "There's a car following me. It has my license plate. The driver. It looks like me." She stared at me like I was drunk or high. One of the truckers chuckled. But I kept repeating it, desperate, until she finally picked up the phone and said she'd call the police. I sat by the window, refusing to blink, scanning the lot. My car sat there, headlights off, engine still ticking. The sedan was gone. I waited, shaking, until a patrol car finally rolled in 20 minutes later. The officer asked me to explain, and I spilled everything, voice breaking halfway through. He checked my plate, my ID, even walked the lot with his flashlight. No silver sedan. He said maybe I saw a car with a stolen or cloned plate, that it happens sometimes, and stress made me think the driver resembled me. "Your mind fills in gaps," he said. He offered to escort me back into the city. I agreed, embarrassed but still raw with fear. The ride back was quiet, the police car just ahead of me, steady and reassuring. By the time we reached the main road toward the festival, I started to calm down. My breathing slowed. I even thought about laughing at myself later, turning it into a wild story for friends. But then, at the last light before the festival gates, something happened that froze the blood in my veins. The patrol car was stopped in front of me, its brake lights glowing red. In my mirror, behind me, the silver sedan slid into place. I could see its plate clearly again, my plate. I leaned forward, my whole body trembling, and I saw the driver. Me. Not smiling now, not mouthing anything, just staring, unblinking, as if waiting. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and when I looked again, the sedan was gone. The empty road stretched back, nothing there but fading night. My chest heaved, my fingers gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I went to the festival that day, but I never felt present. The music, the crowd, the colors, it all blurred past me. I kept checking mirrors, windows, even reflections in puddles. Every now and then, I caught the shape of a silver sedan in the corner of my vision. Sometimes I thought I heard my own voice when no one was near. I sold that car a month later. Told myself it was just bad luck, a bad memory. But when the buyer drove it away, I stood on the curb and watched until it was out of sight. I almost felt relief. Almost. The next morning, I found an envelope shoved under my hostel door. Inside was a photo. My car, parked crooked outside that diner. And in the driver's seat, my face, smiling. Story number 5. We were somewhere between Sarajevo and Mostar when the van slowed down for what looked like a checkpoint. At first, I didn't think anything of it. We were 6 students crammed into a rented Volkswagen transporter, tired and a little irritable after hours of driving through winding roads. The idea of a border made sense in the moment. We'd been crossing through different regions all week, and it wasn't unusual to see armed police or customs officers at random spots. But something about this particular stop made the back of my neck tighten. There were no signs ahead of it, no warning markers, no official-looking structures, just 2 wooden barriers across the road and a group of men in mismatched uniforms waving us down. Our driver, my friend Luca, muttered, "This doesn't look right," but he slowed anyway, because what choice did we have? We pulled to a stop, and a man with a thin mustache tapped on the driver's side window with a gloved knuckle. His accent was thick, but his demand was simple enough. Passports. Luca glanced at us, then rolled down the window halfway. The man leaned in slightly, his eyes scanning each of us with a sharpness that made my stomach churn. "Passports," he repeated. No greeting, no explanation. Just that word, clipped and insistent. We hesitated, fumbling for our bags, because who were we to argue? But as I slid my passport out of its case, my eyes kept darting toward the men standing behind him. There were 4 of them. Their uniforms didn't match, though each had some piece of camouflage, a belt, or boots that looked vaguely military. One carried an old rifle slung over his shoulder, but it looked too rusted to be standard issue. Another held a clipboard, though he never wrote anything on it, just clutched it against his chest like a shield. I passed my passport forward, my hand trembling more than I wanted anyone to notice. The man collected all 6, then stepped back without a word, motioning for us to turn off the engine. Luca obeyed, and suddenly the only sound was the faint ticking of the cooling engine. The men huddled together, flipping through our documents. I watched closely, and I swear they weren't even reading them. They just opened, glanced at the photo, closed, then passed them between one another like kids trading cards. Minutes dragged. None of us spoke above a whisper. Finally, the mustached man returned and leaned back down to Luca's window. "Why are you here?" he asked. His eyes never moved from Luca's face. "Road trip," Luca answered cautiously. "Tourists." The man squinted, as if that word annoyed him. He tilted his head, glancing at me in the passenger seat. "Where do you go?" "Mostar," I blurted, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. The man straightened, considered that for a moment, then said, "Wait here." He stepped back again, the others following him to the wooden barrier. They spoke among themselves in hushed tones. Every second felt like a hammer on my nerves. Maria, sitting in the back, leaned forward and whispered, "This is wrong. There's no border here. I looked at the map yesterday." "Shut up," Luca hissed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. But her words ignited something in me. I'd looked too. There was nothing between Sarajevo and Mostar that required a border crossing. No international line, no disputed zone. So who were these men? When the mustached man returned, he handed the passports back through the window, but he kept his grip firm when Luca tried to take them. He leaned in closer, his voice low. "You must pay." Luca froze. "Pay what?" The man gave a number in local currency. It wasn't outrageous, but it wasn't small either, enough to feel like extortion. Luca hesitated, and that pause was enough to make the man's expression harden. The rifleman shifted his stance, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Luca quickly reached into his wallet, pulled out the cash, and handed it over. Only then did the man release the passports. He waved us forward without another word, stepping aside to lift the barrier. The van lurched forward, and the moment we were past, Luca pressed harder on the gas. No one spoke for a long minute, the silence heavy, suffocating. Finally, Maria muttered, "That wasn't real? That wasn't a border?" "Of course it wasn't," Luca snapped, but his voice cracked. I checked my passport nervously. It looked fine, same photo, same stamps, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The paper felt thinner somehow, the edges more worn than they should have been. I flipped through the pages again and again, trying to reassure myself, but unease clawed at me. When we reached Mostar, we went straight to the hostel. The receptionist was friendly, welcoming, but when Luca mentioned casually about the border stop, her smile vanished. "What border?" she asked. "On the road in," Luca explained. "Checkpoint. They asked for passports." Her expression tightened. "There are no borders between Sarajevo and here, only police sometimes. But not—" She trailed off, frowning, her eyes darting to our bags as if she suspected something inside them. That night, none of us slept well. I lay awake listening to the creaks of the hostel walls, my mind replaying the encounter. The man's face, the way he'd clutched our passports, the strange mismatched uniforms. It all felt staged, but with deadly seriousness. I kept wondering, if Luca had refused to pay, what would they have done? The next day, we visited the famous bridge and tried to distract ourselves with sightseeing, but the tension lingered. When I pulled out my passport again for a train ticket, the clerk frowned at it. She flipped through the pages, then handed it back slowly. "This looks strange," she murmured. My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "The stamps," she said softly. "These are not official. Who stamped this?" I stared at the ink. The marks I hadn't noticed before suddenly jumped out. Uneven lines, blotched letters, symbols I didn't recognize. My blood ran cold. That evening, we gathered in Luca's room, spreading out all our passports on the bed. Every single one had a new stamp we hadn't noticed before. All identical. A crude emblem. Not from any country, not from any border agency. Just a circle with jagged lines through it, like a sun with broken rays. "What does this mean?" Maria whispered. "Maybe it's nothing," Luca said, but his face was pale. "Just some fake mark." But it wasn't nothing. Over the next days, little things began happening. Shopkeepers hesitated when they saw our passports. A policeman at a routine traffic stop looked at ours, then waved us away quickly, almost fearfully. At the hostel in Dubrovnik, the manager refused to accept them as ID, muttering under his breath about trouble. We tried to laugh it off, but the sense of being marked followed us everywhere. By the time we returned home weeks later, my nerves were frayed. At the airport, when I handed my passport to the officer, he scanned it, then frowned. He called over another officer. They whispered, glanced at me, then asked me to step aside. I spent 2 hours in a small white room, being questioned about where I'd been, who I'd seen, what border I'd crossed. When I tried to explain about the checkpoint, the officers exchanged glances I couldn't read. Finally, one leaned forward and said, "There is no border there. You should not say such things." They let me go, eventually, but I left with a warning stamped into my thoughts deeper than any ink could mark. To this day, whenever I flip through my passport, that false emblem stares back at me, faint but undeniable. No one has ever been able to remove it. Sometimes I dream about that road, about the wooden barrier and the mustached man. In the dreams, he still has our passports in his hand, and he never gives them back. And I wake with the same sick feeling I had that night, that we didn't just hand over money on that road. We handed over something of ourselves, something we'll never fully get back. I've told myself it was just a scam, a gang of locals playing soldier to make a quick profit. That's the rational explanation, the one I can cling to when the memories get too sharp. But deep down, when I remember the look in the eyes of that mustached man, the way he studied us like he was memorizing every feature, I know it was more than that. They weren't just after our money. They wanted us marked. And we were. Even now, years later, whenever I meet someone who's traveled that region, I ask quietly if they've ever been stopped at a border that isn't there. Most of them shake their heads, confused. A few laugh it off. But once, just once, a woman from Poland went pale and said, "Yes, I know. I saw them too." She showed me her passport. On the back page, faint and fading, was the same broken sun. And that was when I realized, whatever that border was, it wasn't about geography. It was about choosing people, branding them, pulling them into something they never asked to be part of. We were chosen that night on the road near Mostar, and whether I like it or not, I carry their mark still. Story number 6. We were somewhere between Tromsø and Alta when it happened, just me and Emma in our little rental car, trying to make it to her parents' cabin before nightfall. The roads were mostly clear, though every so often we'd hit patches where the snow had blown across and left uneven drifts. I had both hands on the wheel, tense from hours of driving, when the headlights picked up something that made me slam my foot on the brake. Right there, in the middle of the road, was a mound of snow big enough to be a car. Except the road around it was clean. No other drifts, no piles, just one buried shape sitting dead center. Emma jolted forward in her seat and grabbed the dash. "What the hell is that?" she asked, her voice sharp. My first thought was that it had been plowed off to the side and then somehow pushed back. But no, it was too perfectly centered. I slowed us to a crawl and pulled over to the shoulder. We both leaned toward the windshield, watching the way the snow curved across the outline. Even through the frost, it was obvious. It wasn't just a random mound. It had the exact size and slope of a car. I killed the engine, and the silence pressed in hard. Emma wrapped her scarf tighter and said, "Why would a car be buried like that? In the middle of the road?" She sounded half angry, half unnerved, and honestly I felt the same. I stepped out, boots crunching into ice, and the cold wind slapped my face. My breath plumed white as I moved closer. When I touched the snow, I expected it to be stiff and frozen solid. But it wasn't. The top layer was powdery, freshly fallen. I brushed it away, revealing a dark window beneath. "Jesus, it's actually a car," I muttered. Emma opened her door and leaned out. "Don't get too close," she called, but I was already clearing more snow. The glass was fogged from the inside. That was when my stomach flipped. I pressed my hand to the windshield and yanked it back immediately. The surface was warm. I looked at Emma, my throat tight. "The engine's running," I said. She frowned, confused. "That's impossible. Look at it. It's buried." I dug frantically at the front, shoving snow away until I exposed the grill. Steam was rising from it, faint but undeniable. Someone had left this car here, buried alive in snow, and it hadn't been here long. Emma came up beside me now, her eyes wide. "Shouldn't we check if someone's inside?" she whispered. I nodded, but my body resisted moving closer. Every instinct screamed something was wrong. I forced myself to keep clearing until I uncovered the driver's side door. The handle was stiff with ice, but when I pulled, it opened. Warm air rushed out, moist and stale. And the worst part, it was empty. No driver, no passengers, nothing. I sat back on my heels, shaking. Emma leaned in behind me, her hand clutching my shoulder. "Where did they go?" she asked. The seats were damp, as if someone had just gotten out. Half-empty bottle of water rolled on the floor mat. In the back seat, I could make out a child's mitten, pink with a little embroidered flower, lying by itself. We both stared, frozen, until Emma whispered, "Close it. Please close it." I shut the door and stood up, brushing snow from my gloves. "We should call someone," I said, fumbling for my phone. No signal. Of course, we were in the middle of nowhere. Emma shook her head, her eyes glistening. "I don't like this. Let's just drive. We can find help at the next town." But something inside me rebelled at the idea of leaving. "What if someone's out here?" I said. "It hasn't been long. They could be walking in this storm. A kid, Emma. There's a kid's glove." She bit her lip, torn. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. But we need to be quick." We went around to the back and started clearing snow from the trunk. My fingers were numb, and Emma's breath came out in ragged bursts as we worked. When the plate finally showed, I read it out loud. YK2734. The letters and numbers meant nothing to me, but I wrote them down on the back of an old receipt. That was when I noticed the prints. They weren't tire marks. They were footprints, leading away from the car into the trees. At first I thought it was just one person, but as the snow shifted in the beam of our headlights, I realized there were at least 3 sets. 2 large, 1 small. The smaller set dragged unevenly, as if the child was being half-carried. Emma's hand clamped around my arm. "No," she whispered. "We are not following that." I swallowed, staring at the dark line of trees. Every part of me agreed with her, but something about the half-buried car, still alive with heat, gnawed at me. I wanted to know why it was there, why no one was inside. Reluctantly, I let her pull me back to our own car. We sat inside with the heater on, our breaths shaky. "We'll report it at the next station," I said, trying to sound steady. She nodded quickly, her eyes never leaving the snow mound in the road. As I turned the key, I caught sight of something in the mirror. Movement near the tree line. I froze. Emma noticed my face and twisted around. There was nothing, just wind stirring branches. We drove around the buried car carefully, my hands slick with sweat on the wheel. Emma didn't speak, and I didn't either, until finally lights appeared in the distance. A roadside diner. Relief washed over me, though it felt fragile, like it could vanish at any second. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and fried onions. A man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper. His eyes narrowed slightly when he saw us. I ordered coffee just to calm my hands, and then I leaned in, asking if there was a police station nearby. He nodded, slow, as though measuring us. "Why? Something happened on the road?" I told him about the car, about the footprints. His face didn't change, but he folded his newspaper carefully. "What plate number?" he asked. I pulled out the receipt and read it to him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled. "You sure?" Emma frowned. "Yes, we saw it ourselves." The man rubbed his jaw. "That family went missing last winter. Husband, wife, little girl. Police searched for weeks, never found the car. His words sank into me like cold water. Emma's chair scraped back. "No," she said. "We just saw it. It's there." The man shook his head. "I don't doubt you. Folks around here, well, sometimes things don't stay where they should." His eyes lingered on us, almost pitying. "If you know what's good for you, you'll keep driving. Don't go looking." I wanted to argue, to insist someone should check, but Emma was already pulling at my arm, her face pale. We got back on the road, the tires humming against ice. Neither of us spoke. My mind replayed the scene over and over. The warm glass, the mitten, the footprints. By the time we reached her parents' cabin, dawn was breaking. The windows glowed golden, and the smell of wood smoke seeped into the air. But the comfort I expected didn't come. I lay awake in the guest bed, every creak outside making my chest tighten. The police came later that day after Emma's father called them on our behalf. They listened patiently, nodding, then drove out toward the stretch of road we described. Hours later they came back, saying they'd found nothing. No snow mound, no car, not even disturbed drifts. I almost laughed in disbelief. Emma just looked relieved, as if erasing it made it less real. But I know what I saw. I can still feel the warmth of that windshield on my palm, still picture the tiny glove lying forgotten in the back seat. Maybe the family walked away. Maybe they froze in the woods. Maybe something else entirely. The police gave us polite smiles, thanked us, and left. That night, I dreamed of the footprints leading away. In the dream, I followed them. They never ended. They just stretched deeper and deeper into the trees, while behind me the car sat humming, buried again, waiting for the next person to stop. And even now, when I close my eyes, I see Emma's breath trembling in the cold, hear the silence pressing in after I killed the engine. I tell myself we did the right thing by leaving. But there's one detail I never shared with her, and I don't know why I didn't. When I first opened the driver's side door, before the warm air rushed out, I swear I heard a voice. Not words, just a faint sound. A child's whimper cut off too quickly, as if someone had pressed a hand over a mouth. That's the part that keeps me awake. Not the car, not the missing family, not the police who found nothing. Just that brief, fragile sound. Proof, in my bones, that for a moment, someone was still inside. Story number 7. I had been on the road for 12 hours straight when I first saw her. My rig was rumbling down a wet stretch outside Bari, the kind of backroad truckers only take when they're avoiding tolls. Rain hammered the windshield so hard, I had to lean forward over the wheel just to make sure the lines on the asphalt didn't disappear completely. That's when the beam of my headlights caught a figure standing by the guardrail, soaked through, arm raised with her thumb out like she'd been waiting for someone all night. I don't usually stop for hitchhikers. Too many risks, too many stories of drivers getting robbed or worse. But something about her, this kid, no more than 16 or 17, her hair plastered to her face, a school bag clutched to her chest, made me press the brakes. I remember thinking, if that were my niece, I'd hope someone would give her a ride. She slid into the passenger seat without a word at first, dripping water all over the vinyl. I reached behind the seat, pulled out an old blanket I kept for cold mornings, and offered it to her. She took it, wrapped herself up, and mumbled, "Grazie." Her voice was small but clear. I asked where she was headed, and she pointed vaguely toward the outskirts of town. "Just outside Bari, near the olive fields," she said. That didn't narrow it down much, but I figured I'd at least get her closer to civilization. She gave me an address after I pressed, scribbled on the back of some receipt she pulled from her bag. The cab smelled of wet clothes and engine grease, and for a while the only sounds were the wipers struggling against the downpour and the hum of the diesel engine. She didn't talk much, and I didn't push. Still, I kept sneaking glances at her, the way you do when someone in your passenger seat feels out of place. Her clothes were outdated, looked like they belonged to another decade entirely. A plaid skirt, a plain white blouse, a jacket that looked handmade. I chalked it up to maybe being from a poorer family, but the more I looked, the stranger it seemed. Eventually, she spoke again, asking me if I ever drove this road at night. I told her sometimes, though I preferred the highways. She nodded, as if that confirmed something she already suspected. Then she asked, "Do you ever see accidents out here?" I answered honestly, "Yes, plenty. Narrow turns, slick roads, tired drivers, it happened." She stared out the window like she was listening to ghosts, and whispered, "It's dangerous here. People don't always come back." That sent a chill through me, though I forced a chuckle to cover it up. "Well, I've managed so far," I said. She didn't smile. The kilometers dragged on. The address she'd given was on the edge of town, down a road I wouldn't have taken unless I lived there. When the turn finally came up, I swung the truck off the main road. The path was rough, gravel snapping under the tires, lined with gnarled olive trees, leaning close as if eavesdropping. She suddenly sat upright, clutching her bag tight, and said, "Here, stop here." I pulled over, squinting through the rain. There was a house ahead, an old farmhouse, light flickering in one of the windows. She turned to me and, for the first time, looked directly into my eyes. Hers were dark and unblinking. "Will you walk me to the door?" she asked. I hesitated. Truckers don't usually get involved past the ride, but something about the way she asked. It was almost desperate. So I cut the engine, grabbed my jacket, and got out. We walked up the muddy path together, the rain soaking through my boots. By the time we reached the porch, she was standing a few steps behind me, head down like she was waiting for me to do the talking. I knocked, 3 firm raps. After a moment, the door opened, and an older woman peered out. Wrinkled face, gray hair pulled back in a bun, her eyes sharp despite her age. She looked at me, then at the girl behind me, then back at me again. "Can I help you?" she asked. I explained that I'd picked up her daughter, at least I assumed it was her daughter, on the road, and I was just dropping her off. The woman's face changed in an instant. The warmth drained from her expression, replaced with something that was half sorrow, half disbelief. "My daughter," she whispered. I stepped aside to gesture at the girl. But when I turned, the porch behind me was empty. No wet footprints, no figure clutching a bag, nothing. I froze, my stomach dropping. The woman's voice trembled as she said, "My daughter died here, 20 years ago, on that very road." She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling up. "She was 16. She was coming home from school when a truck hit her. She never made it to the door." I stammered, insisted I wasn't crazy, that I had given her a ride, that she'd been sitting in my truck just minutes ago, wrapped in my blanket. The woman shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "Every few years, someone comes to my door saying the same thing. They all describe her exactly. The same clothes, the same bag, the same rain." My hands were shaking. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but my throat was too tight. The woman stepped back into the house, fetched a framed photo from a side table, and held it out to me. It was her. The same plaid skirt, the same shy expression. The girl who had sat in my truck wasn't a stranger at all. She was long dead. I stumbled back from the porch, muttering apologies, my boots slipping in the mud. I half ran, half fell to my truck, fumbling with the keys, desperate to get back on the main road. When I climbed into the cab, the first thing I noticed was the blanket. It was folded neatly on the passenger seat, dry as if it had never touched rain. But on top of it sat the receipt she'd scribbled her address on. The ink had bled from the water, but I could still make out one word at the bottom: home. The drive back was a blur. My chest felt like it was caving in, and every time the headlights flashed across a bend, I expected to see her standing there again, waiting for another ride. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, and even then, I kept checking the passenger seat, half certain she would reappear. For weeks after, I avoided Barry's outskirts. I told myself it was just exhaustion, a hallucination from the long drive, the rain, the stress. But deep down, I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. That girl was as real in my cab as any living passenger. The way she spoke, the way she asked me to walk her home, it wasn't some dream. Months later, I found myself back in Bari, picking up a shipment. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked another driver if he'd ever heard of strange things on that road. He gave me a long look, then nodded slowly. "The schoolgirl, right?" he said. "Everyone's heard of her. Some say she's looking for her mother. Some say she's warning us about the road that killed her. Either way, you don't stop. Not if you see her. You just keep driving." That night, I parked my rig in the depot yard and sat in the cab, staring at the blanket on the seat beside me. No matter how many times I washed it, I swore it still smelled faintly of rain. And though I tried to push the memory aside, every time the clouds gathered and the road grew slick, I couldn't help scanning the shoulder for a girl with a school bag, waiting for someone kind enough, or foolish enough, to stop. The truth is, I did stop, and I walked her to the door. And though I never saw her again after that night, I know she's still out there, replaying the last steps of her life over and over. I tell myself I helped her, that maybe guiding her home one more time gave her some peace. But when I close my eyes, I still see the way she looked at me before disappearing. The dark, steady eyes of someone who knew I would carry her memory for the rest of my life. And I do. Every mile I drive, every time the rain hits the windshield, I carry her with me. Not as a ghost story to tell in bars, but as something that happened to me, something that carved its mark into my life. I don't care if anyone believes it. I know what I saw. I know who I carried in my truck that night. And I know without a doubt that the girl who wanted a ride never really made it home. Story number 8. I was walking along the roadside with my backpack slung low on my shoulders when I noticed something glinting faintly in the gravel. At first, I thought it was just a bottle cap or a coin, but when I bent down and picked it up, I realized it was an old key. Not just any key, it was attached to a heavy brass tag, the kind motels used to use before electronic cards took over. The number engraved on it was 17, and though most of the tag had tarnished, I could still make out faint lettering scratched into its side. Estalagem de São Vicente. The letters were Portuguese, which didn't surprise me because I was in Braga, but what struck me was how out of place it seemed, lying alone in the dirt on a road no tourist would bother walking. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight. It was cold, colder than the air, as though it had just been pulled out of a freezer. I told myself it was probably just metal reacting to the shade, but something in me was curious. I had been backpacking across Portugal for a week, following little more than instinct and the cheapest bus routes. I wasn't exactly on a schedule. So when I saw the faded words São Vicente on that tag, I decided I had to find out if the motel still existed. At a small cafe nearby, I asked the woman at the counter if she knew it. She frowned as though the name had stirred something in the back of her mind. "That place?" she said in Portuguese-accented English. "It burned long time ago. Nobody goes there?" She said it quickly, almost dismissively, and turned back to her work. But that made me even more intrigued. A place gone, yet here was a key from it. Why now? Why me? I followed a rough description she gave me. Out of town, toward the hills, past an abandoned quarry, and after an hour's walk, I spotted the blackened ruins of what must have been a 2-story roadside motel. It wasn't marked on my tourist map, and weeds had swallowed most of the lot. Only the stone outline of the building still stood, like bones after a fire. Windows were just jagged gaps. The roof had long since caved in. And yet, standing in front of it, I felt a strange pull, as though the key in my pocket was leading me home. I should have turned around, I know that now. But at the time, I told myself it was just curiosity, just exploration. My boots crunched over the charred remains as I stepped into what had once been a lobby. I tried to imagine it as it must have looked. Cheap furniture, reception desk, maybe a rack of tourist brochures. Instead, the only things left were blackened support beams and the faint smell of ash, even decades later. In the back, I noticed a hallway with numbered doors, most burned to little more than frames. My hand instinctively went to the key in my pocket. I pulled it out, staring at the brass tag. 17. The numbers on the doors had survived here and there, though most were melted or hanging loose. I walked slowly, counting as I went. 10, 11, 12. The corridor felt too long, like I was walking farther than the building could possibly stretch. My chest tightened. 14, 15, 16. Finally, there it was. 17. The door was warped, half collapsed, but when I held the key against the ruined lock, it slid in with an ease that startled me. The mechanism clicked as though it had been oiled yesterday. I froze, my heart hammering, but then a thought pushed me forward. Maybe there was something inside. Some relic, some forgotten trace of whoever had last stayed there. I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was intact. Not burned, not ruined, not even dusty. I stepped onto a carpet that felt new, smelled faintly of detergent. The bed was made with crisp sheets. A lamp glowed softly on the nightstand. For a second, I thought I had walked into the wrong place entirely, like some new motel hidden inside the shell of the old one. But when I looked back, the hallway outside was still charred, black and skeletal. I whispered, "This isn't possible." Then I heard a sound, the faint drip of water. I turned toward the bathroom, the door ajar, light spilling through the crack. My throat went dry. Against all sense, I walked closer. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The mirror above the sink reflected the room perfectly, but not me. I wasn't there. The sink dripped steadily, each drop echoing like a hammer in my skull. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the bed frame. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but as I moved toward the door, it slammed shut. I twisted the knob. It wouldn't budge. My pulse thudded in my ears. Then came a sound that still makes my skin crawl. Voices, muffled, many of them, whispering from inside the walls. I couldn't make out words, but they were urgent, overlapping, pressing against me from every direction. "Stop!" I shouted. "Who's there?" The voices stopped instantly. Silence, heavy and unnatural. Then, from the corner of the room, I saw the mattress dip, as though someone had sat down. I couldn't see anyone, but the indentation was clear. Slowly, more appeared. On the chair, by the window, on the floor near the bed. Shapes pressing down on fabric, but no bodies. My breath came in shallow gasps. One voice finally broke the silence. A man's, deep and steady, speaking Portuguese words I barely understood. But one I caught clearly. Queimados. Burned. I felt the air thicken with heat, the lamp flickering. The carpet under my boots darkened as though scorched. My skin prickled with the memory of flames I hadn't witnessed but could feel, searing and suffocating. I suddenly knew what I was seeing. The guests, they hadn't left. They were still here, in this room, in every room, trapped in the moment of their deaths. My head spun. I backed into the door, pounding on it. "Let me out! Please, let me out!" My fists thudded, and finally the knob turned. The door flew open and I stumbled into the blackened hallway. It was charred again, ruined, silent. No voices, no glowing lamps, only ash. I bolted outside, the daylight hitting me like salvation. My lungs burned as I gasped for air. I didn't stop running until the ruins were far behind me. When I finally collapsed on the roadside, I pulled the key from my pocket, intending to throw it away. But it was gone. Not slipped out, not dropped. Just gone. That night, I stayed at a small hostel in town. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those whispers, felt the air grow hot around me. I told myself it was exhaustion, nerves, my mind filling in blanks. But when I reached for my bag in the middle of the night, I found something heavy inside the front pocket. I didn't need to look. I already knew. The brass tag pressed cold against my palm. 17. I couldn't keep it. The next morning I walked to the river and hurled the key as far as I could. I watched it sink beneath the current, bubbles rising, the water swallowing it whole. Relief washed over me. I thought it was finished. But later that evening, while buying bread at a bakery, the cashier handed me my change, and among the coins was the same key. Tarnished brass, engraved number 17, cold as ice. I dropped it on the counter and staggered out, heart pounding. Over the years, I tried everything, leaving it in train stations, burying it, even handing it to strangers. No matter what I did, it always came back. Sometimes it appeared in my coat pocket, sometimes under my pillow, once, terrifyingly, clenched in my own hand when I woke from sleep. I don't tell many people this because it sounds insane, but I know what the key wants. It isn't an object, it's a tether, a binding to that place, that night, those voices. Room 17 is still waiting for me. I've never gone back to Braga, never dared approach those ruins again, but the key never lets me forget. Even now, as I'm telling you this, I can feel its weight in my pocket, and I know someday I won't have the strength to throw it away again. Someday I'll put it back in the lock where it belongs, and when I do, I won't be coming out. That's the end of our 8 Halloween horror stories. Which one will keep you up tonight? If you made it this far, drop "The Night is Watching" in the comments. And remember, on Halloween, the darkness walks among us.